Good morning and welcome to BAC Talks, our first full day alumni symposium put together by the BAC Alumni Advisory Council. Thank you for all being here and your enthusiasm in supporting our community. My name is Janet Roach and I am the chair of the Alumni Advisory Council. I'd like to extend a special welcome to our esteemed alumni whose accomplishments and contributions continue to inspire us all. Your presence here today is a testament to the strength and camaraderie of the BAC family. I also want to express my gratitude to the Alumni Advisory Council and the BAC Talks co-chairs, David Derringer, Anthony Frosto Robedro, and Robin Wilcox, for their exceptional leadership and dedication. Their tireless efforts in organizing this event have made today possible, and we're immensely grateful for their commitment to fostering connections among our alumni. We have a wonderful program for you today. All morning sessions will be held virtually, and the afternoon sessions will be taking place at the college, but also available via Zoom. I would like to encourage everyone to participate in as many sessions as you can, because each session is unique and inspiring, just like our alumni, and it's free. So let's make the most of this day, engaging in meaningful conversations, forging new connections, and celebrating the spirit of creativity and collaboration that defines the Boston Architectural College. Once again, welcome to BAC Talks 2024, and thank you for being a part of this extraordinary event. I would now like to introduce Robin Wilcox, BAC Talks co-chair and Alumni Advisory Council member, who will be moderating our first session this morning. Thank you. Robin, take it away.
Thank you, Janet, and welcome everyone. I'm Robin Wilcox, a member of the Alumni Advisory Council and co-chair of the BAC Talks today. We'd love to see who our audience is this morning. So if you could go into the chat and share who you are, where you're from, and your affiliation with the BAC, that would be lovely. This first presentation will be 45 minutes, including a short period for questions at the end. If you do have questions, would you please write them in the Q&A, not the chat, but in the Q&A area at the bottom of Zoom, and we'll facilitate questions at the end. Lastly, if it doesn't happen automatically, would you please mute yourselves now and for the duration of the presentation? Thank you. So I am delighted to introduce our first speaker this morning, my BAC contemporary, Arlen Stawasz, BArch class of 2012. Arlen is well known to the BAC community. In our time as students, he was active in student government. He was on teams for the Solar Decathlon in 2009 and on the follow-on Ecotopian House in 2011. And graduated with a long list of scholarships and awards, including the Alpha Rho Chi Medal. After graduating, he returned to the BAC to run city lab intensives and to teach advanced studios. And since 2021, he has been as prolific across the pond, writing and speaking, including a TEDx talk, at conferences across Europe. He is currently EU Regional Resilience Leader at Gensler Europe in Berlin, Germany, from where he comes to us today to present Architectural Design Forecast in the year 2100. Welcome, Arlen.
Thank you, Robin. Can folks hear me okay? Just checking here. Okay, it is an absolute honor and pleasure to have an opportunity to share some of the work that I've been up to with some of my colleagues and some alumni and maybe even some current students. Let me just make sure I'm sharing the screen properly here. And that's a photo of my kids. Just bear with me. Okay. All right. Can folks see me okay? Folks see everything?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So today I'm going to talk about some of the forecasts that we're seeing as a company, but also I've been seeing in some of my own personal research over the next century. And there's some really big challenges that we're going to have to that are coming into play. We have climate change, which is undeniable. We have refugees, war-torn, and climate. And we also have carbon emission expansion and biodiversity collapse. These are enormous challenges that, to be totally frank and honest, we need design leadership to step up to the plate and come up with some big and brilliant and bold ideas to tackle some of these. So today we have the technology to live essentially anywhere on the planet, in some of the coldest temperatures with mechanical heating, and in some of the hottest temperatures with mechanical cooling. We understand that the Earth is getting hotter, and we are continuously seeing record-breaking temperatures annually on a global basis. We're also continuously seeing unprecedented fires across the globe. In the Arctic, for example, unprecedented fires in the Amazon, unprecedented fires throughout Europe, in Australia, and different parts of California as well. In addition to that, the way that we look at water also needs to change. So, for example, this is a kind of a sphere of the Earth, but these other spheres represent different forms of the water. So this larger sphere is the amount of salt water that exists on the planet. This middle, smaller sphere is the amount of fresh water that exists on the planet. And that very small blue dot is the amount of drinkable water that exists on the planet. Today, we have 2 billion people with too much water, and we have another 2 billion people without enough. And we have the resources to tackle a lot of these issues. And without water, there really is no sense of life. There's no form of life without water. So the more we try to control our water with these enormous infrastructural projects, such as these enormous dams or levee systems, the more our water really controls us. And this is an aerial view of Southern California, where we're shipping water from different parts of Montreal and Canada just to feed our crops in this region. The Arctic is melting, and some scientists actually believe there's a distinct scientific possibility that we could have close to 6 meters of flooding. When exactly that will happen, that's still to be determined, but some countries are actually taking this into account, like the Netherlands, like Germany, and like Denmark, for example. I've had the privilege of doing a wide array of research, and this was an opportunity that I had to spend some time in Iceland and actually explore some of the glaciers it's actually Europe's largest glacier. So this is a photo of me actually in this glacier. And probably one of the biggest mind-blowing facts behind this is that the glacier and the space that I was standing in at that point in time was no longer existent over the course of 5 years. And I would say a lot of this has receded since then. The U.S. has seen enormous storm surges across the last 25 years. Hurricane Andrew in the 1990s, about $27 billion worth of damage. Hurricane Katrina, about $150 billion worth of damage. Hurricane Sandy, $90 billion. Hurricane Harvey, $125 billion. Hurricane Maria, $90 billion. And the Texas winter storm, $130 billion. And over the past 25 years, the U.S. alone has spent over $1 trillion in revitalization efforts from extreme storm surge events. So what is resilience, and why as designers are we responsible? Well, the AIA has a very big position on this. They believe that we need to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. So for the health, it's about securing physical, biological, and mental health of building occupants. For the safety, it's about addressing building and landscape structural compromise. For the physical safety of occupants, and then for welfare, it's about the social equity and long-term survival of us as a human species.
I might have missed it if I would have thought.
In addition, the AIA has a strong position on it in terms of just understanding the architects actually have a responsibility, and we need to design a more resilient environment. Over the last 2 years, the AIA recently released this document, which is essentially a hazard and climate risk user guide acknowledging the risks. So what this does is it essentially documents the conversation and pre-design when you're discussing the job opportunity in the project. And it talks about those climate conditions and the impact that they'll have on the project. And over the course of time, this is a record document to say that you've had these conversations, you understood the risk, and did you design for it? And actually, we're seeing a lot more of this in terms of our work, and especially in the last 5 years. Folks are really interested in developing more climate resilient buildings, whether it's heat or whether it's increased precipitation or flooding from sea level rise, et cetera. So climate shocks are really making an enormous shake on the United States, and some parts of America are really just uninsurable. So this was an article just in the New York Times last year, where it's basically saying that California is stopping coverage in certain aspects of the land. So how long will we be able to live this way? And before we have to sort to new methods of living, there's over 376 million refugees that have been displaced forcibly from climate-related events. In Syria, it's about 14 million, Ukraine about 6.5, and in Palestine, unfortunately, about 7 million displaced by war-torn. And today, the prediction is that we'll have about 2 billion refugees by 2100. So these are really big challenges from climate to refugee situations that we need design solutions for. So now that you all know this, you can't unknow this. And this actually came to me from, this quote came to me from one of my mentors when I was at Perkins and Will. She currently works for Climate Adaptation Partners, but she always keeps this in my mind when I speak to her. In addition to these challenges, we have the global carbon pricing that's more than just climate, but global carbon pricing is on the rise. We're seeing emissions and carbon pricing and sort of taxes that are basically forcing people to make better decisions in building design. So many countries have adopted certain schemes and are forcing carbon emitters to pay a carbon tax. We're seeing a tremendous push in the European region. We're beginning to see it in the United States. We definitely see it already in Canada and some parts of Asia as well, but we have a long way to go. But this is really transforming the way that we're thinking of practice, especially in the European continent. We have the capability to mine the Earth's resources from essentially anywhere across the globe. And we understand that because it's cheaper to purchase certain products from abroad. But one of the biggest challenges of this is that we know that the built environment is actually responsible for about 40% of carbon emissions. And so this is such an enormous challenge, and we really need to rethink the way that we look at carbon emissions. Urban development is expected to double by 2060, and that's equivalent to building a city the size of New York City every 4 years. So emissions are really kind of an assumption. Emissions are really the consumption problem, and we need to reduce that consumption problem. And if we reduce that consumption problem, we'll reduce the emission problem. We need a shift in our mindset. Our ancestors built buildings to last for thousands of years, where we build buildings to last for 50 years. And 90% of our projects will need to be demolished or rebuilt over the course of 50 years. And this is a quote from David Attenborough, which I totally align with, which is, in order to restore our planet, we need to restore our biodiversity. And this is the very first thing we removed in the first place. So I think that this image really kind of speaks volumes. You know, we had this big COVID shock in 2019, 2020, 2021, which led to a recession, but we still have climate change. And then there's a bigger thing that's happening, which is biodiversity collapse caused by climate change. You know, the UN SDG wedding cake model really says it well. In order to have a strong economy, we need a strong society. And in order to have a strong society, we need a strong biosphere, and everything is interlinked. So we need to kind of really work with the systems that we have and design closer to the systems that we have. This is actually the biodiversity loss curve, which basically projects that if we go down the level of business as usual, which is extremely dangerous, we're going to see biodiversity collapse within the next 100 years, and a significant part of that. With an increased conservation, we could make a bigger impact on that. And with transformation in terms of how we design and we change our consumption, we could really increase biodiversity. And this is such a big challenge. We're starting to see biodiversity net gain a big part of the process in the UK, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So decarbonizing the built environment, what does that mean, and how are we at Gensler accelerating the path to net zero? A little bit about Gensler. We're one of the largest innovative design companies in the world. We have about 7,000 plus design professionals, over 46 offices across the globe. We're considered one of the big architecture giants, and we're one of the big green design firms with the breadth of work that we do. We're a research-based practice, which basically means that a lot of our research actually does inform our practice and actually does inform a lot of our clients' decisions. And a lot of times we actually get hired because of this research. It's a big part of what we do, and we enable a lot of what we do into it. About 18% of our profit goes into research. We have over 33 practice areas. I'm technically a part of the climate action and sustainability practice area, but also the sciences and healthcare practice area. And we really kind of saw 2020 as an inflection point. Since 2020, we've seen the demand of office space decrease. And there needs to be this new transition of that. And we've also seen an increase of ESG related issues, but also a really big push for ESG reporting. So we've actually seen that this is a $17 trillion industry globally. And by 2030, it's predicted to be a $60 trillion industry. So there's a huge market with getting certain aspects of portfolios to understand the long-term risks associated with their properties, as well as how to lower the operational carbon and embodied carbon of their real estate assets in their portfolios. So as I mentioned before, we're seeing a major acceleration of this, almost like a 22% leap in just the last 20 years. And we're seeing this particularly strong in Europe, and we think that the Americas is not too far behind. We're seeing it across 64 countries and over 96,000 assets. So in order to really understand how to become carbon neutral, we need to eliminate or offset the impact of operating or embodied carbon. And how do we do that? We need to understand how we're actually manufacturing the materials, how we're bringing and transporting the materials to site, how we're, and for operational carbon, it's really about understanding what those operational needs are, whether it's lighting or ventilation, heating, cooling, cooking, refrigeration, et cetera, but also the carbon offsets. What can we do to potentially influence and create an offset for carbon sequestration, such as investing in nature or investing into renewable energy? So these are big components of our process at this time. This is a huge magnitude of a challenge. We're going to need architects from across the globe to really help and be a part of this position. And in addition, we need to bear in mind that the goal for 2030 is to be a net zero company. It's a very ambitious goal. Will we get there? I think we might. I think we're definitely investing a lot into the company and how we're tracking our metrics, but this is a big part of it. So what do we do in terms of carbon reduction potential? The first option is to build nothing. But most of our clients don't want that option. Second option is to build less. And a third option is to build a little bit smarter. So understanding how you optimize the material usage of what you're doing, designing for disassembly, for example. And then the last one is building efficiently. So really understanding the low carbon construction technologies and eliminating waste. These are the four principles in how we're pushing carbon reduction in our design process. We're also looking at building less new buildings and really having a bigger focus on adaptation and adaptive reuse as part of our portfolio. In addition, we're seeing over 150% increase in building certifications across the globe. This means that there's a need for, especially developing new buildings or existing buildings within cities, that they meet a certain level of these certifications and accreditations in terms of how the buildings are designed to. Because of all this work, we've launched a climate action and sustainability practice area. We see that our clients are really asking for it, and we're hiring talented staff who understand the strategy and advisory services around sustainability, how we're looking at assessments and analytics, how we're looking at the rise in certification and verification of our buildings, but also how we're looking at post-occupancy and assessment analytics. This is a really big part of our work, and we're seeing the scales basically from product design, fit out, building, portfolio to even cities. So this impact is really enormous, especially in the European continent. Across the firm, we're taking on a lot of the toughest challenges. We're participating in some of the leading sustainability and climate action events, such as COP. We've participated in it, I think, for the last 5 or 6 years. We've been making new commitments each year to push for this. In addition, we've launched a GC3 initiative, which is I'll get into in a minute. This is really about pushing climate action in cities. And finally, we're also finding creative ways to track the carbon in our portfolio. We've been able to record that we believe we've saved over 21 million metric tons of carbon in our portfolio globally. And that's our goal, but we've already saved 11 million annually. So our GC3 initiative is really about a commitment to carbon neutrality, accelerating major progress in cities, contributing that towards our research, but really challenging the industry and developing new tools and protocols that the industry can use to push for climate action. So we're, as I mentioned before, a big part of our company is research, and we've developed kind of a branch within the Research Institute called Climate Action Through Design, which we have people staffed full time pushing for this. So we're focused on these drivers. We're focused on ESG, so environmental, governance, and social. And I think that this is becoming a bigger piece in America, but it's definitely at the forefront and the center of what we're doing here in Europe. So it's really about understanding the environmental impact, the health and well-being impact, social equity impact, financial impact, and the experience impact, and how all of these things take play into from the early stages of design to operations and maintenance to long-term portfolio assets, as well as business operations and what you're doing as a company to make sure that diversity is a big part of your plan. In addition to this, our CEO has recently wrote a letter, well, actually not so recently, about 2 years ago. And the letter essentially focused on developing a new supply chain. We want to focus on more local specified materials, and this is a bigger part of our process that we're pushing for. It's really about understanding the circular economy and enabling local vendors to have a bigger play in our design projects. In addition to this, we've also launched the Gensler Product Sustainability Standards. This is a global platform that's listing out 10 of the top material emitting materials, and we're listing out certain products and certain manufacturers that are meeting really good embodied carbon metrics. So the thought is that what we're doing here is that we're providing a tool that can make it easier for folks to specify materials. So I talked a lot about challenges, and I talked a little bit about Gensler. These are some of the global design solutions that we think could potentially contribute to those 4 big challenges. So one is tracking carbon. As an industry, I don't think we're that good at data-driven design, but I think that we're getting better at it, and we need to quantify our impact even more. We also need to look at how we're designing buildings for disassembly and even cities for disassembly. I'm on a few projects where we're really looking at this at an urban scale, but also a building scale. AI technology is making a huge impact in what we're doing. It could also influence the way that we're doing material passport tracking. And then regenerative design, really pushing climate positive design and sequestration solutions. So regenerative design is really about understanding how we invest more into nature for our projects and reducing carbon through sequestration. So this is kind of like a typical port in any kind of city, maybe in the United States or maybe in Europe. Typically it has poor air quality, it has urban heat island effect, there could be a sea level rise or a flooding risk problem, and it's really about flipping that challenge upside down. So I took this image from Climate Positive Design. They're actually located in Harvard and they do brilliant work, but we've had the opportunity to collaborate with them through research. And this is essentially about understanding what the future is, which is about restoring, enhancing ecology, carbon sequestration, reducing operational emissions, and reducing embodied carbon just by investing more into nature. So by investing more into nature, it's actually really simple. It's about understanding that plants release, through the process of photosynthesis and plant respiration, we can actually capture carbon and have carbon sequestration naturally. It's really that simple, and we need more nature on our projects. We need more nature in our cities. And just recently, actually, the City of London announced that 2% of all new build projects must have a biodiversity net gain, which means that 2% of the total area must have that. Over time, it's anticipated to grow, and I think that by maybe 2030, it might be at 15 or 20%. But this is an enormous start that is forcing developers to make a bigger impact on nature. So from carbon tracking, we're seeing an enormous legislation pull, especially in Europe, that's forcing certain types of projects to actually provide LCA analysis. And LCA analysis is, it can be something that's done by an engineer or an architect, but essentially it's an added service. And so if your company is really serious about ESG solutions, then LCAs must be a really big part of it. And so our clients are looking for these metrics and evaluations on our projects, and we're tracking LCAs in multiple market sectors across Europe that are really influencing what we're doing in the United States, as well as in the APME regions and the LATAM regions. We're finding that a lot of our clients are really kind of pushing more for SFDR reporting, so Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation reporting. And this reporting is basically, it's sometimes it's public, sometimes it's private, but it really pushes the folks that own their real estate assets to disclose what their carbon emissions are, both embodied and operationally. So this is a really big thing that we're excited about, that we're thinking that's really pushing it. In addition, as I mentioned before, design for disassembly is is becoming a bigger part of the conversation. So from the beginning threshold of figuring out how the building's put together to how you take it apart over time. I'm currently working on a city for 9 million people where we're looking at design for disassembly as a big component of how we do it. You know, if the city needs to be designed over the course of 100 years, over the course of 300 or 500 years, then perhaps we need to look at the infrastructure and how we could design it for disassembly for when upgrades and new infrastructure and new technology come into place. This is about also improving circular economy. If we specify more local materials and there's a local manufacturer, it's easier to disassemble and to recycle a lot of those materials, reuse a lot of those materials, and divert those materials from landfills. So it's really about understanding those closed loop systems. And I think that designing for disassembly could also make an impact on the future of climate or war-torn refugees as well. If we can design cities for disassembly, like pop-up cities that could potentially, house temporary situations of people being dislocated by climate events or war-torn events, then we potentially can really embrace cities with a new level of thinking of how to tackle some of these challenges. In addition to this, we're seeing AI blow up across the entire planet. Blockchain technology is definitely the future, and specifically for material passports. We're finding that the projects that we're using are asking for more material passports and looking to blockchain technology to essentially tag a material after it's disabled, after it's disassembled. In addition, we're seeing an increase of demand for data centers. So with more artificial intelligence, we're seeing a bigger increase of data centers. And this is kind of a paradox in a way, because the more data centers we have, the more data we can put out there. But data centers could actually make an impact on climate change, because the more data centers we have, the more carbon that's emitted in the atmosphere. So there's kind of this there's this effort and regulation that really needs to be understood here. So there's something that I put here. This is actually a rendering that I did in under 30 seconds. It's through DALL-E. And essentially what it's saying is I typed in the text below: regenerative design, bird's eye view, coastal, symbolic, nature, urban, theoretical, futuristic, realistic city. And essentially why I put this in there is because I think that, and we think as a company, if we can really embrace the power of AI to illustrate the challenges and the solutions of climate change or refugees or other types of design problems, we can get to those solutions a lot faster, especially really embracing this technology. The next thing I'm going to talk about is just a couple case studies. So one of them is the next project. It's actually a lab building of the future, a part of the Gensler Research Institute. And it's a little bit different because it's an evolution of what a science building could look like or perform like. And it's all measured by data. We've worked with certain engineers as well as developers to develop this. So it is actually based off real data. A lot of folks that look at lab buildings, they're pretty complex. They're energy hogs. They're really big and enormous when it comes to carbon emissions. And so we looked at this as an opportunity to liberate the space between kind of a container for people, as well as enticing new tenants to think differently about the office, but also develop a different level of product differentiation and leapfrog past the competition in terms of what's being offered on the market, and then using decarbonization as a methodology for resiliency. So the site was in Seattle, and we looked at this kind of hypothetically. But essentially the thought was that if you look at kind of like a typical core and we offset that core, we could really maximize the space that's associated with that core, especially for science. Science requires a certain type of grid. It's a certain dimension for the grid. So we were using 33 feet by 33 feet to really maximize the bench layout. In addition to that, we had a lot of indoor-outdoor spaces that also isn't very typical in a lab environment. And then we wanted to just mobilize the floor plane by investing more in sort of community catalyst assets, but really embracing the pedestrian street presence as well. So this is kind of a rendering of the building. Essentially, it has operable windows. It has those open terraces. And the thought was that this could be a pretty low embodied carbon design through the process of the structural integrity of the building. But also engage more with the community. So when we put this out there, the original intent was, can it be done? And the answer is that it can be. And this original idea actually led to new actually built work. A lot of it is confidential and I'm not allowed to share it with you, but we actually have projects that are looking at this right now. And this research really informed the practice. So I guess for folks that own their own practices or are part of research-based institution practices, the research actually can really make an impact, especially if it's visual, especially if it's really backed up with some solid numbers. So the key performance indicators of the project was really understanding optimization, reducing construction waste, understanding the efficiencies of construction, and then, as I mentioned before, looking at a 33 by 33 foot grid for a lab building. For environment, it was about EUI reduction, greenhouse gas emission reduction. For operational, it's about understanding natural ventilation. And as I mentioned before, that's really rare in a lab. Embodied carbon reduction from the structural footprint of the building. And then for health, it really kind of embracing outdoor spaces, offering balconies and roof decks for building occupants, as well as having a communicating stair, which allows folks to just kind of use the stair more instead of the elevator. And then the social equity was really about embracing the neighborhood by inviting folks in to be a part of the incubators, whether that could be a restaurant or other kind of inspiring or aspiring minority entrepreneurs. And then also embracing the local arts district downtown. So this project may or may not be built at some point in time, but it definitely stimulated a lot of new thinking. Based on our research, we think that this project would be about 80% less carbon than a typical conventional lab building. So this is another project. It's number 6. It's actually our London headquarters. It feels like it acts like a workshop and it feels like home. Essentially, it was an existing building. We went through a demolition process. We activated it with new communicating stairs, and we enhanced it by putting a new type of facade as well as new floor area ratio on top of the building. Essentially, we activate it through the process of experience, creating kind of a creative platform for people and culture and collaboration amongst. So the office itself really acts as an incubator in itself. These are just some photos of the connecting stair in between, as well as some of the hospitality. A lot of folks that walk by our office in London, they think it's a hotel, but it's actually an office. We actually host events there, and we could use it to actually generate revenue at some point as well. Well-being is a big part of it, and it's really about embracing the blur and the different merge of work styles and lifestyles. Another project I'm going to share is the Gensler substation in China. It's a data center advancing AI technology. A big part of this is that if you look at a typical data center, essentially it doesn't really have a human component to it. Most data centers across the globe are really kind of these back of house spaces that are not really inviting. And the thought behind this was, can we actually transform that and create the data center as an opportunity to really engage more with the public and transform our cities? The thought is, can we do that with other infrastructure, like a wastewater power treatment plant or other types of treatment plants, for example? One data center equals the electricity of approximately 50,000 homes, which is absolutely enormous. And the amount of carbon dioxide from one training of an AI module is equivalent to about 5 American cars. So emerging technologies are really transforming our practice. And the more we look at these technologies, the more we need to really understand the major incentives that come into play. So a story that I like to tell is of the mansard roof in France. You actually didn't get taxed because it was a roof, but it still provided a usable area. And that's how the French developed a lot of the architecture in downtown Paris, was based on this mansard roof. In addition, if we can find ways to increase the floor area ratio for developers, we will see a faster impact in terms of carbon reduction. So if we can use these kind of tax reductions and these generative ideas of supporting new floor area ratio for sustainable development, we'll see a faster impact. And we're seeing that in different parts of Europe for sure. These are some quotes that I like to live by. One is, human knowledge is always limited. We may think we know the solution today, but tomorrow it could be something completely different. And there's no shortage of money. There's more of a shortage of ideas. And I really mean that. If we can spend over $25 trillion in revitalization efforts from climate events, then we can find a way to pay for half of that to really kind of build and retain our cities in a resilient manner. We could find a really unique way of encompassing and embodying refugees that have been displaced by climate or war-torn events. I think that we're really lacking a lot of those ideas. And I think the more that designers are on the platform demonstrating these ideas, using the technology to demonstrate these ideas, the bigger impact we'll see. And then the last quote is the best way to predict the future is to create it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Arlen. We now have about 5 minutes to answer questions. I see there are a couple in the Q&A. Thank you. Starts with ones from Karen Nelson at the BAC. Where can we see what all the sustainable expectations or standards of things like Nordic Swan, so we can integrate those into our architecture and design studios?
Great question, Karen. I think that's one of the hardest things, is that sustainability is, there's not kind of like this common umbrella where a lot of these things exist, where we can find ways to just look at what every country is doing. There's not a lot of that, to be totally honest, and we need that, because these different measures, things that are happening in the Nordic, for example, or things that are happening in the UK, they're different advancements. I'm really inspired by what's happening in Denmark, where they're saying, okay, every new project needs to have an LCA, which means that every new project is gonna require for embodied carbon metrics. Where in Germany, for example, they're saying, well, all new public buildings need to have an LCA, or public schools. Where in the UK, they're saying, well, if you're pursuing a new project in London, you need to do BREEAM, and BREEAM is requiring an LCA. So it's really kind of haphazard in terms of the data. And we're finding different ways to kind of mine the data and look at it and assess it. I want to say that there isn't one, direct common resource that has it all. We're finding that the more we can collaborate on a global level and learn from each other, the bigger impact we can have. So unfortunately, there is no one kind of research we can look to, but they're available in different countries. And I think that the key is just starting with the local legislation, finding out what those conditions are, but also finding who those key players are and what they're doing. So I'm personally inspired by a lot of the Nordic countries. I'm inspired by what's happening in Germany and Netherlands and the UK and France. I'm also inspired by what's happening in the US and the LATAM region. The LATAM region is probably pushing urban heat island effect in a much more unique way, specifically in Curitiba, Brazil, or different parts of Costa Rica, for example. They're really embracing ways to combat extreme heat. Even the MENA region in the Middle East, the way that they're embracing extreme heat, they've been doing it for centuries. But I think that it's really about kind of unraveling this research, really kind of diving into it and understanding what the problem is. Every design problem is different and requires a different solution. So I think you just need to understand that design problem in order how to find the answers.
Thank you. Another question has come in from Meredith Contello. Greetings from Austin. I was intrigued by your imagery and story of the data center impacting community. Seeing data centers as a more common project type now, how do you convince the client to make that connection with community? Was research used to convince that particular client?
It depends on the location. Some data centers, they're not necessarily located near an urban district. Sometimes they're located, 1 or 2 hours outside of a city. But we're finding that the ones that have more of an urban district, or at least they're kind of closer to one, it's a more convincing argument that actually the data center, if designed correctly, could increase the property value, adjacent to it. And we can find a way to just make it a destination rather than an eyesore. A lot of folks don't necessarily want a data center in their backyard, but if it's designed in a certain way that's really engaging, that's a place where people can actually bring their kids, that's a place where people can go for lunch or even shop or even be a part of retail, it can really transform the way that we think about it. So it really depends on the client's appetite, but also the location. That's probably the more convincing component to it, is the location.
I'm thinking about not long ago, I flew into Columbus, Ohio, which has a definite downtown, but outside of it seems to be a ring of farmland that's been turned over to data centers. So flying over it, you see box after box after box after box, and they're giant. it's hard to picture that those might become sort of urban magnets or urbanized magnets to draw people, but it would be a cool thing if we could make it that way, wouldn't it?
Totally. And the more that we're going to see AI in part of our process, which is it's inevitable, the more data centers we're going to see. So if we can find a way to really embrace a new look at the technology that needs to come, then we could potentially transform a lot of those areas. There's no reason why a data center can't have mixed use components to it, in my opinion. Yes, budget is a big constraint, but if the vision is there, I think that it could really become anything.
Yeah, how do you make something that's basically a box or any other kind of box, like storage facility, Amazon warehouse? How do you persuade somebody to turn that into something else at the same time to draw that? Makes it for a much different, a much bigger project, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So following on the first question of Karen, I think when you're in a large, either at a research institution like a university, or when you have a large company and you've got a research department, that's fabulous for developing a lot of the policies that you might have to encourage clients. And I'm now thinking about how people in smaller practices who might not have a research department and who might have a lot of smaller clients, much smaller clients and much smaller projects, there's pushback to adding in things that are wonderful for the climate and wonderful for the community. They're in there, they've got a little project, they want to save money and just get it done. I think that's a bit of a challenge. I know we find that in the practice that I'm in, it's a small one and people really just want to save as much money as they can. So accessing a lot of that research would be important, especially if it's not proprietary, like some of the ones in an office would be. So I think it's useful if we do find a way of developing ways of collating that research, like Nordic Swan or some of the other things that you've found around London. It'd be lovely to be able to collate it. And I guess we have to rely a little bit on public policy to jawbone it in to people that otherwise would be disinclined to do it just for social good or environmental good.
Well, Robin, I think that times are going to change really soon in the States. I think that eventually there is going to be kind of embodied carbon metrics, especially in cities, that you're going to have to do. You're going to have to provide this information. So I think that it's only a matter of time before the regulations really kind of catch up. I think that in terms of smaller practices and the impact that they can make, I think that really understanding those low embodied materials that you could specify can potentially make a really big impact when it comes to carbon, when it comes to resilience in terms of climate action, depending on the size or the scale of the project. If your project is in New England, for example, you're going to have much hotter summers, and you're going to also have colder winters. So the more you can have a better insulated space, the better that program, the better the project can be. So really aligning to Passive House standards could be a really big part of the process. If you could also demonstrate the cost benefit analysis of saying, okay, well, yeah, it's going to cost you a little bit more for insulation, but over time, you're going to save this much on your energy bills. I think that might be a constructive argument that could potentially influence the way your practice is run. At least that's what we're finding on bigger projects, but smaller ones as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Are there any other questions from some of the people attending? If not, then thank you so much, Arlen, for joining us today. Unless you have any last thoughts that you'd like to add, we have a couple more minutes in there.
I think the last thought that I have is just that, if you have a passion for climate action, if you have a passion for sustainability, get involved with your local community, find ways to really kind of demonstrate and represent the architectural community, because, most folks don't necessarily think the way that we do. Having that different perspective at the table with multidisciplinary professionals there's tremendous value. And you'd be surprised at the opportunities that can come into play when you just show up and you get involved. I think that there's tremendous potential within the New England region for opportunities to get more involved in your communities, whether that's through the Urban Land Institute or, you know, through teaching at a certain program or just being involved with certain community programs. But your impact could be absolutely enormous just by applying yourself. And it also opens your networking opportunities as well. Really proud of this program as well. It went dormant for a little while, and I'm really happy to see that it came back, and I'm super honored to have the opportunity to be part of it. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. That was really inspiring, and it was lovely to see you here and motivating about the next important critical things that we all need to do. Thank you, Arlen.